That can go. That can go.
Says we're on YouTube now. Okay.
Close that.
Yeah, it's looking better. So far, you haven't froze again. So maybe it'll be okay now.
Okay, so it says that we're live on YouTube now.
All right, go ahead and introduce us.
Okay, so here we go. Welcome, everyone. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre, and it's a great privilege to be here reconstructing history with Michelle Gibson and Gary Pierre Carlson. Welcome, Michelle and Gary.
Thanks
Hey,
for
everybody.
having me.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now, I am going to turn it over to you, to the program, so that you can introduce us to reconstructing history and guide us here, because I look forward to being guided through your tour of reconstructing history.
Okay. Well, I look forward to that. I have some of my blog posts pulled up that I want to highlight with this. So I'm going to have you share your screen in just a moment, but let me give a little bit of background information about myself. I started blogging in 2018, and my blog is on my website, which is piercingtheveilofillusion.com. And that was after I had made my first video on physical evidence for a planetary grid system and a suppressed global civilization. And when I go through my blog post, I'll be able to give more explanation about that. But I've been interested in different things my whole life. I've never really been a crowd follower, and very curious nature. I'm glad I didn't major in college because I was interested in history, and I'm glad I didn't go that route, because that I wouldn't have been open, I think, to receiving the information I have. And it's really important to understand the nature of what's taking place now. And in my research of alignments of cities and places in alignments, I've actually been able to pull forth the original ancient civilization, as well as how it's been taken down and how we've been educated in a new false historical narrative. You know, like cradle to grave, we've received false information our whole lives, especially about our history and who we are. And it became crystal clear when I was tracking alignments, because I kept encountering this information. And it seems like I've encountered everything I needed to know throughout living my life to be able to put the puzzle together. Things that I would read, places that I lived, things that I learned, people that I met. And it's all brought me to a place of a very high level of awareness about what's going on right now. And Gary's work on I Check Your Soul and the ability to read souls has some really good corroborating information that I think we've had a hostile takeover of the Earth's grid system and humanity by non-human souls in human bodies. And I'll go through what I've uncovered in my evidence that supports that whole idea, that we've had a very hostile takeover here, that I foresee ending, but that's how we got to this point.
Okay. Gary, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Well, I can say that I get the reptilian souls in human bodies took off about 12,200 years ago. I'm told there's maybe 25 of them or so to start, all in female bodies. And when the female has children, the children always get a soul from the same group as the mother's soul, regardless of whether the father has a human soul or a reptilian soul. And so they just kept the lines going all through history that way. And I'm not sure how many there are now, but last I'm getting, there's around 425,000 people that have human bodies and reptilian souls. And I'm getting that 88% of them have a draconian soul, and 12% of them have a lizard soul from a lizard people group. And draconians as a group are more evil than lizards. And I think both of them having a soul that doesn't have empathy for others means that when they have sex with a child before puberty, they get this great energy rush that's, I guess, very pleasurable to them. And that's what's causing this child trafficking. And as a group, they have 80% of the money on Earth, even though we got them outnumbered like 6,000 to 1 or something like that. And so they have a lot of money to pay for all this child trafficking and all that. And it's all about satisfying their desires. And I'll stop there for now and maybe add more later.
So I just want to get one of your numbers straight. You said that there were 425,000.
That's what I'm getting from my guides.
Out of 7 billion humans,
7.5
only
billion or something like that. Yeah, I can divide that if you want.
only 425,000 are these kind of these invading souls, we would call it, or these occupying souls.
Yes.
Okay. So Michelle, could you kind of go back and reset the stage and tell us when exactly did this happen, and what was humanity before, and when did this happen, and when was this triggering event? What triggered this, and when did this happen exactly?
Okay. So my research has been basically based on, my personal research has been based on an awareness of this original ancient civilization, which goes back to Lemuria and called Moorish. And that's the paradigm that I'm working from. They were master builders. They built everything according to sacred geometry. Everything's laid out according to sacred geometry around the earth. There was free energy. Everything was precisely placed. Everything was in alignment with heaven and earth. They created all of Earth's infrastructure to include all rail systems, above the earth, below the earth. Considerable evidence of plenty of infrastructure that's underground. And it was highly evolved. And I was going to cover the history piece in this panel, but I also have a lot of evidence gathered to show exactly why I believe this. And I've come to believe that there was a deliberately caused cataclysm, creating a flood of mud. And I will be going through some examples of that in this presentation. And that the controllers that we know of today that had a hand in causing it were there shovel ready to start digging out enough of the infrastructure to restart civilization. Now, there's a lot more MudFlood researchers looking at this infrastructure and this event than the exact work that I'm doing with regards to the Moors and the history piece and following alignments. So there's a number of different causes out there speculated for what could have caused the MudFlood. I will be covering how I came to the conclusion that there was a rip in this fabric of space-time created around 1740, 1741 in our timeline. I have speculated that it was caused by the Philadelphia experiment. And I go through different places where I truly don't believe that is out in left field. I think it was a causal factor, because what I landed on solidly is that there was a 3D time loop created between 1492 and 1942, and 1717 is the midpoint year. And there's 450 years, I believe. I'm going to be covering this, so I'll be able to go back and, circle around and pick that up again. And that the beginning of the new reset historical timeline, the official beginning of it, was the 1851 Crystal Palace exhibition in London. That was the kickoff. But there was a lot of activity before then and after that, especially in the 19th century and probably even the early 20th century, around resetting the civilization so it could be turned into something that could then be controlled and us controllable. And how they managed to suck up all the wealth, the 80% that Gary talked about or more, how they did that. How did they do that? And
So-
that's what my research has led me to. And again, I'm going to go through some of my blog posts to show that.
Great. So just to recapitulate, what you're saying is that this system, this kind of inner takeover of these souls, dates back to around 1740 to 1741. Is
I
that
believe
correct?
that was the year that a tear in the fabric of space-time occurred, and that was how they were able to start incarnating. I don't think they could.
I see.
I don't think they could come in physically before then.
I see. And what is this 1492 to 1942 paradigm? What's that?
So let's call that the boundary years of a time loop in the shape of a figure 8, with 1717 being the midpoint year of that. That they reset everything according to that, and
what does that mean? What occurs in that time loop?
So 1492 was the year of the fall of Granada in Spain, which is the only place that's acknowledged to have a high Moorish civilization. And 1942 was the third year of World War II, and there was a lot going on in 1942. Besides the Philadelphia experiment. And now when I first started doing the research for that, 1942 was the year that was given for it. Now 1943 pops up a lot.
You're saying that 1942 was the year of the Philadelphia experiment.
Right, but it was also the middle of World War II, which ended in 1945.
It was also my birth year.
And your birth year. And remember,
No, I mean, I'm just saying, it was my birth year. Interesting. Like, why was I born in 42? I always wondered about that. I was born on Sunday, the feast day of Mary, Help of Christians. So, yeah. And what does 1851 have to do with it then?
So 1851 was the year of the Crystal Palace exhibition,
Right.
Which took place between May and December of that year. And there's an impossible timeline that they've said that they built it in like 9 months. All these technical wonders that were showcased. And I've really come to the conclusion that these world fairs, especially the ones between 1851 and 1950, they were showcasing the wonders of the original civilization before they were destroyed or hidden away.
I see.
And
I see.
1851 was the beginning of that.
So that the elites always knew this, and they're just kind of showcasing this.
Right.
So
they didn't do it. They claimed credit for it.
Yeah, they gave credit card so that Victoria and Albert would have known this. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Their fingerprints are all over everything.
Or all over everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Victorian era, so to speak.
Oh, okay. And you have this written someplace which you're going to demonstrate to us now.
Correct.
Oh, good. Wow. Amazing.
I wouldn't say it if I couldn't back up why I believe it.
Okay, now before we launch into that, I have one question. And what is 2020 in all of this?
Perfect vision.
2020. Yeah.
Because 2020 is the year of the great pandemic. So what is 2020 in all of this? If anything, or is it just another year?
I think it's the start of the Great Awakening.
I see. Okay.
Or the acceleration of the Great Awakening. I mean, there's been a number of people that have been awake for a while going, hurry up.
I see.
Do something about this. I've been waiting for this for 9 years, but now, it's clear what the controllers' plans were, how they were planning on taking over everything, taking over us, limiting us.
Right.
And up until last year, it's like, okay, well, I know they have bad plans, but how are they going to do that? Well, we've all had this painful experiential lesson as to exactly how they plan to do it.
Okay, I got a couple things to add then.
Sure.
I've been asking questions about this mud flood, and I'm getting that it was caused by an earthquake weapon. You just have like a 6 or 7 magnitude earthquake, but you make it last an incredibly long time, like for 10 or 15 minutes straight or something like that. And it churns the earth and the aquifer below it into mud, and then it bubbles up. And they do it in, they pick their places like certain cities and stuff. It wasn't like a worldwide thing. It was in isolated places where they wanted it. And then ask a few questions about the technology. First of all, I get that humanity rose to technology and then got knocked down by cataclysm 6 times. And this is like the 7th time we rose to technology. But I'm getting they had electricity in the past, but this is the first time we invented the electric motor and the radio. Before that, they didn't have that, but they might have had other things we don't have now, like they could take these giant blocks and use some kind of sound to make them real light and mushy so that they could build the pyramids and all these megalith things that way. And then you were talking about the money. I'm getting they got 80% of the money, which they got mostly in the last 100 years or so, because they're the ones control the printing of the money. They own the central banks. And they own about 20% of everything. I'm getting that in the ancient past, they were the kings and queens, and they might have had some project going like what Michelle talks about back thousands of years ago. And they blasted everybody and tried to redo history and start over, and it didn't work out, and they did it again and again. And back in like the 16 or 1700s is their new latest project of taking over humanity. I think that it's been done and redone over again is what I'm getting.
Well,
Like Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, I'm getting them. Those people had reptilian souls, and some of the leaders in Egypt did. I don't think they had a high population back then, though. They just had a few key people, and they had their draconians walking the earth to put them in their positions of power. And now the draconians don't walk the earth, but their population is higher, and they use technology to control the world, which they couldn't do before. All right, go ahead, Alfred.
well, if what Michelle is saying, that it was the tear in space-time in 1942 or thereabouts, with the Philadelphia experiment that allowed some incarnation sort of input, so that the number of these souls exploded to 425,000,
Yeah,
which is the new number. That really says that the function of the Second World War, and specifically of the Nazis, was to create that and to funnel that in through the Third Reich. Is that the point? Or
I'll be covering that when I go when I'm going through this.
oh, good. So that I'm on the right tracks, but I don't want to accelerate the narrative too much. So over to you, if you want to share the screen or
Yes,
whatever.
please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, do you have to get? Do you have? Or have you made me the host?
Oh no, you can just share. So you automatically have permission to share.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Okay. All right. So this is a blog post that I did on repopulating the new world. And I focused on charitable aid organizations, orphans, immigration, and so forth. And I'm going to be going through my findings throughout this because it's a very long blog post, and the video itself is over an hour long, and it's actually exclusive content on my paid subscriber sites, but it's important information, and I want to bring it forward, my findings forward. Okay, so my research is based on finding this sacred geometric shape by connecting cities that lined up in lines in North America. I learned about sacred geometry around 2007 through Drunvalo Melchizedek's teachings. And then I followed other researchers over the years when I was just hungry for information about this civilization I couldn't find out anything about. And so I knew what I was looking at. And because I was interested in the alternative research of earth energy researchers and so forth, and I actually had a Moorish American man come into my life who befriended me in around 2012. So he brought in an awareness of the Moors as real people, real alive today, and that civilization and their teachings. And there's just this high level of consciousness that just emanated from my friend and then from other Moors that I met. It's, you know, it's just amazing people.
What kind of names do they have? They have special names or different than our name?
There's a lot of L's and B's and
Okay.
so forth. I mean, if you look at Freemasons and the Shriners, that's hijacking the Moorish legacy and so forth. And they're a big piece of what's been going on here. And I will be covering that in this, okay? So I knew enough about the ancients to know that everything was very precise, and I started to extend these lines coming off of North America. And then I wrote down the cities and places that were lining up in lines or circles. And that's what my research is based on, is tracking these alignments, looking at the places, seeing the similarities all over the earth. For something that seems to have been a positive path for humanity, I believe up until recently. I mean, we're living and working in all of their architecture. And again, I don't want to expand the scope of this too much because there's so much information, but I'm really sure that, you know, our courthouses, our schools, our museums, our theaters, especially the older ones that haven't been torn down, were built by this original civilization. So the summary of my findings when I was looking at this 19th century period, as far as what was going on for humanity, these are the things that I find out. And again, I want to stress, this is something anybody can go look up. This is what we're allowed to know. This is what we're taught in school. Starting in the 1830s, there was a population explosion of poor people and orphans. And prominent people in both Europe and America organized charitable aid movements with a stated mission of helping people find their way out of impoverishment, providing guidance, advice, and at the same time, providing the bare minimum of charitable aid. And the prevailing social attitudes of the mid-19th century blamed people for their poverty and applied the notions of worthy and unworthy poor to charitable aid. Okay, so there's this population explosion, lots and lots and lots and lots of kids. And these rich people that are organizing these aid societies are like top shelf in society. And so again, if we're looking at the concept that the elites, you know, came in and just established themselves at the highest levels of society with all of these humans that they got, that they have to take care of. And it's a mess. The 19th century, if you really look into it, was a mess for humanity. Much more so than today. You know, as bad as things are now, it was worse during this time period. And at the same time that this was going on, again, we can kind of pinpoint around 1830, this started to come out. You start to see distilleries pop up everywhere. Hard alcohol became widely available and promoted for consumption to the general population. So you have teacher Scotch whiskey popping up in 1830, and then they have something called dram shops that started to be established there in like Glasgow. And people could just go in and, you know, taste the whiskey. And then amusement parks started to show up, like Electric Park in Kansas City, which this is a picture of, and the Heim brothers, brewers from Germany. Their father came over on 1854 and started setting up breweries in Missouri. And then they're given the credit for building the Electric Park, which was a beautiful place. Walt Disney was said to have based his creations on Electric Park. And they were setting up beer gardens and things like that, you know, just this, you know, incredible availability of alcohol. And then people warehouses were commonplace. Adult asylums, juvenile asylums, poorhouses, workhouses, almshouses, and so forth. I mean, they had to put people somewhere, I guess. And they ended up in places like this. And if you look at the literature of the day, like Charles Dickens, especially, but even Victor Hugo in Les Miserables, you know, the Miserables, you see, you know, children being used for labor, like at the very beginning of the book with Cosette, the little girl that was being treated very poorly. And there's other orphans that show up during that time. And then it's also during a time of upheaval in Paris that's actually quite significant. But again, there's too much to kind of try to cover all of that. So elite family names show up in connection with these charitable aid organizations like the Rockefellers. There was a connection with the first secretary of the Association for the Improvement of the Condition of the Poor. And his son was was in charge of, I think it was Remington Arms. He had a big connection with arms and ammunition from during that time, around the Civil War. The Astors, I believe it's Mary, I want to say it's Mary Astor. So this is Geraldine Rockefeller, and this is Mary Astor. Mary Astor was directly connected to Charles Loring Brace's Children's Aid Society and the Orphan Train movement. Okay, she was giving them money to get these kids out of the cities. It started in 1854, and again, you're going to see a lot of dates pop up around that 1850 timeframe. There's quite a few before that, there's quite a few after that, but there's just a lot gelling in the 1850s. These kids are being sent out with strangers to live with strangers. There was no effective accountability for their well-being. Safeguards were in place for lip service, but the reality is that there was very little accountability for safe placement of the children during the orphan train movement. And if some child got lucky enough to end up in a good home, it was a matter of good luck, because these kids would be, let's see, so they're at the, say like the local community hall or music hall or whatever, and they were just paraded up in front of people to choose whatever kids they wanted. And sometimes there were orders placed for these children. So there's a lot of fishiness around this whole movement. But again, it's something that, we see it maybe on television every once in a while. I think there was a made-for-TV movie a couple of years ago. But I think this was the beginning of the child trafficking movement. The first juvenile reformatory was established in 1825, and there were a lot of reasons given for the causes of pauperism, including bad parenting and poor choices and gambling and all this stuff. Again, their alcoholism. The conditions have been created to, hurt people so that they couldn't be good parents if, in fact, there wasn't something else going on, and that's a whole nother story. And I'll get into one of those examples with infantoriums here in just a moment. So they're creating the conditions for parents to drink and not be able to work and all that kind of stuff, blaming them for it at the same time. And, these are the social conditions that are cropping up during that time frame. So these reformatories were with the idea of keeping youthful offenders out of prison and poverty. So this is supposed to help them, is the idea. Public and private orphanages started to become commonplace by 1850. And the American Civil War was said to have resulted in more orphanages with an estimated 400,000 children needing placement. Yeah, so the numbers that have been put out there are pretty high. Starting in the 1840s, there was a massive wave of immigration of approximately 7.5 million people to America from Ireland, Germany, and China because of crop failures, economic hardship, revolutions, and wars to blame. And typically, the German immigrants had some financial means to travel and find decent occupations. However, the Irish and Chinese immigrants typically arrived with nothing and ended up taking menial and manual labor jobs, paid hardly anything, doing whatever they could for these low wages. And so that was the case with the Irish and Chinese, and later with the Italians. What's interesting with the Germans is that I'm finding Germans cropping up all throughout the history that I'm looking at, especially in North America. Like I said, coming over and establishing breweries, department stores, beet factories, sugar beet factories. I found several German references, tracking alignments. I found a German colonization effort in the Republic of Texas in the 1830s, 1840s. The Republic of Texas existed for about 10 years. So it was during that time. These German nobles got together and they were looking at sending German citizens over to establish this colony. And there are several places, several cities. And we're told that that effort stopped because they ran out of money. But I just found lots of examples of German communities in the heartlands where they did very well, you know, very wealthy people. So, you know, that's a whole nother thread as well. Okay, so, you know, with the whole idea of the mud flood, there's definitely some interesting pictures out there that you can find. And this is supposed to be San Francisco around 1851. And where you see the slanting road there is typically what people look at when studying the subject of mud flood, because there's uneven entrances, there's windows at ground level. It's not level at all, you know, so there's just a lot of questions about that. And then this is supposed to have been in like the early 1900s. And I want to say one is Pittsburgh, and off the top of my head, I can't remember what the other one is. It's in, actually, I can go back here. I can look.
Whoa.
So this is some of the architecture that's accredited to Henry Hobson Richardson and called Richardsonian Romanesque. And he's got a couple of really, really ornate buildings attributed to him, but he had no formal architectural training and he died at a very young age. So there's this process of attributing all of the architecture to certain people. Okay, so this one would be Pittsburgh in the early 1900s, and this was Kansas City before the 1870s. You know, so there's these pictures are out there if you Google mud flood, and then there's other ones as well. So I go back down here. This is a courthouse in my mom's hometown that was said to have been built and opened in 1909. And courthouses are a big indicator that the style of architecture doesn't match what we're taught we were capable of at the time. You know, so that was supposed to have been done in 1909 with, you know, these big, huge columns. And you can find this style of architecture literally all over the world, in places you wouldn't expect to find it. Okay, so let me get back down to where I was.
I'm getting that was done by humans rather than the reptilian soul people.
Yeah, I think that it would have been done before what I think was the event where they came in and started to incarnate. So between 1896 and 1942, infantoriums displaying premature newborns in incubators became popular as sideshow attractions at world fairs, at fairs in general. And what we're taught is that this was the healthcare for newborns during that time, not hospitals, but these infantoriums. And I have to say a big red flag goes up for me with what this was really actually all about. I don't think it was about healthcare whatsoever. And so, you know, I said before, maybe the orphan train movement was the origins of the child trafficking today. And then the same thing with some of the institutions. You know, was there something else going on besides providing the care for parentless children? You know, maybe not in all cases, but there's certainly examples out there in our time of places where that was suspected to be the case, even though it's like vehemently denied, is still out there. As soon as the infantorium program ended, Margaret Sanger's American Birth Control League became known as Planned Parenthood, or, okay, yeah, the name, so Margaret Sanger's 1921 American Birth Control League became known as Planned Parenthood in 1942. Okay. So this is the man that nobody knows if he was a doctor for real or not, but he was the one that spearheaded the infantorium issue. And then you have, I talked about the Opium Wars earlier in here and how that was going on around, I think, between 1839 and 1842, where there was clearly manipulation going on in China with the British that gave their blessing to the illegal raising of opium in Bangladesh. And that after the treaty was signed, I want to say it was the Treaty of Nanking or Nanjing, same place, but it has different spellings. It was shortly after that that opium dens sprung up everywhere. So again, you've got, you know, the alcohol that's starting to come out during this time period. You're getting opium dens coming out. You know, you get people that are like neutralized and addicted to these substances, and that's all popping up during this time. You know, and it's why is that going on? And so had to end it, and we are asleep no more. But what I have come to believe is that there, like I said earlier, there's a relatively recent, deliberately caused worldwide liquefaction event, and that the new historical reset history and narrative was superimposed over the original history and existing infrastructure by negative beings who wanted to benefit themselves and have ultimate power and control over humanity. And they've deliberately manipulated the events and conditions in our world for their benefit and our detriment. And I'm going to go into how they did that. Let's see if we get that up. Close up. So before I go on, any questions?
Well, I'm just sorry. Well, I'm just looking forward to the continuing narrative, trying to put together and connect all of the dots that you've presented. You know, so you're in the process of demonstrating a process to us. So that's what we're following here, I would say.
Do you think this mud flood just happened in certain cities? Like, is there any indication it happened in Africa or Australia or?
I think it was worldwide.
Okay, I'm getting it just happened in key cities where they wanted to have it.
I think it was, I do think it was worldwide. I found evidence in India and other places, in Scotland. I'm just pulling places off the top of my head.
How about Africa? Do you see any of it there?
Off the top of my head, I can't pull out an example that I've studied, but
Okay.
But I have looked at Africa, and there's just a lot of it's out there if you know what to look for. And how do you wipe this advanced civilization off the face of the earth completely from our memory banks when they were so advanced that they were, they're just amazing beings, and have nobody have any recollection except for the Moors themselves? It's just like that we've had this, 2x4 over our heads to make us forget, and all this psyop kind of stuff going on for a long time to confuse us and fragment us and, get us at odds with each other, when in fact it's not for our benefit.
Well, now when you say the Moors, who exactly are you referring to?
The way that I like to frame it is that the Moors are the ancient advanced humans that built everything. Lemuria, Moor, M-U-U-R.
I see.
Yes, Moorish. And typically, Moors are, they wear the fezzes, and they have actually a highly
Are Tartarians in with the Moors or the same thing?
yes, it's all part of the same civilization. One website I like is the Clock of Destiny, and there's some good information in here. I think organized religions came in with the hijack. What we know is organized religion. I think the teachings were there. All the teachings that have come down to us were about how humanity could connect with our higher selves, and that Islam is like, I self-law am master. It's learning how to master our spirit in physical form, and is a much broader connection to the universe in general. But the controllers just split everything out and then proceeded to divide humanity by religion. And all of these symbols here are connected to the Moors originally. So they've been given different meanings for different groups.
So what you're saying is that what you're defining as the Moors is not Islam as we know it,
Right.
modern Islam and the Quran, etc. It's a different entity.
Islam just used more symbols along the way, is all she's saying.
So they used the Moorish symbolism against all of humanity, essentially, when they decided to take God out of ourselves firmly, from inside to outside, and needing an intermediary to explain everything when we're in fact a spiritual being having a physical experience. And it's not what we've been conditioned to believe.
So the Islamic terrorist is not Moorish terrorist. It's
No.
a different.
It's completely different.
And Islam as we know it now is not the Moorish.
No.
That's correct.
Yeah. And so what would the Moorish be? What is that? What is the origin of the Moorish?
So it would be more along the lines of what you would think of as Hindu or Buddhist. And an Egyptian.
They probably had pieces of all those societies. I'm getting that.
And learning how to raise Kundalini and access our higher abilities.
Now, when you had the Moorish, quote, Moorish occupation of Spain, what was that?
The Moors were all over the world.
No, but by your view, what we know is the Moorish occupation of Spain, which at a certain point, the Moors were ejected from Spain. I think it was around 1492, wasn't it?
Right.
So how does that fit into this equation?
So that's what we're taught. Okay. I've come to really think that a lot of our history is just backfilled based on real people, real events, but that's why I call this reconstructing history, that there's a lot that was penned later on to put these people into the narrative, historical people and historical events, and that the history that we know really started sometime around this, the 1740 time period, 1700s to whatever. And I'm going to cover some other things that tie into that with perception of space and time and that kind of thing. But I have encountered, when I was studying early explorers, like Prince Henry the Navigator, the Portuguese, I want to say it's Carvalho or something like that. Anyway, who discovered Brazil and so forth. And when I was starting to do the research, they'd say, well, there wasn't anything on this guy for like 300 years, but then this book was written by this German author, this biography, or this English author wrote about this. And again, it was in the same late 1800s time period. So there's this literature that's coming up in the 19th century about these early explorers. And I think they're setting the narrative that way.
But now, to go back to the question of the Moors in Spain, who were the Moors in Spain?
They were
like who built the Alhambra, and what was the
did.
Alhambra?
They did.
When you say they,
the Moors built it. The Moors built the Alhambra.
Yeah. But what do you mean by the Moors? See, I think it would be helpful to your presentation at the beginning to make a precise definition of terms, because it's difficult for the audience to follow your narrative because the terms haven't been defined from the beginning, but we're auto discovering the terms right in the middle of the presentation. So it's these original Moors that were the builders of the Alhambra, and they were the good guys who were expelled by the bad guys who were the Spanish. Is that what you're saying?
What ethnic group were they?
Well, they were black, but it's so confusing because we there's just not a lot of information in terms of exactly how, what happened to the races. Were they all black? I don't know. But the Moors themselves that I know of are black. And that I believe that history was turned upside down. Everything was turned upside down by these controllers. But the simplest way I can put it is more relates to Lemuria, and that there was a continuous civilization, ancient civilization on it until relatively recently. And that there's been a lot of historical whitewashing done.
So you think Lemuria was black people?
I mean, I think history's been whitewashed.
So you don't want to, you're not sure. Okay.
Well, I'm just saying this. I mean, this whole subject is big.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah.
There's a lot of pieces in it. And I'm only going through what I found in my research to support that whole idea. And I found a lot of information.
Yeah, I seen some pictures of Moors, and there was some white and some black in some pictures.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not 100% sure how that was all broken down. I'm really not.
So you're not sure the ethnic group of the builders.
Well, no, I'm sure that they were black. I just am not sure what the distribution was. If there were some black, some white, some yellow, some purple. I mean, I don't know.
Okay. It's not real important, I guess. I'm getting that people with reptilian souls started Christianity and Islam religions, and they took over Hindu and Buddhist, but didn't start them. And the same for like Zoroaster and some of these other religions. Anything going with any power, they will try to jump in and take over it. There's an opposition group to what they're doing. They'll try and lead it. They're doing that today. All these religions today, the high people in them all have reptilian souls as what I get. So they're strongly using our religion to control us.
I mean, the knowledge of who humans are has been removed, but the original humans that I'm talking about knew that there were, instructions that were given to humanity about how to reconnect with our higher spiritual selves and our higher abilities, and that all of humanity was learning that, not fighting, not at odds, and very advanced. And these negative beings wanted that for themselves. And so they figured out how to get in here and mess everything up.
What is the origin of the negative beings?
I think we're talking reptilians. I think we're talking fallen angels. I think the book Paradise Lost by John Milton was an early form of disclosure and predictive programming, because that was all about, the fallen angels getting kicked out of heaven and conspiring about how they were going to contaminate God's most favored creation, which was humanity. And so they came in, and the story is the temptation in the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, and it was their fault because they ate from the apple. I think the original books of the Bible are much more extensive than the ones that were removed at the Council of Nicaea that's come down to us. The books that talked about the same other teachings about our higher abilities were removed, and they're called the Gnostic Gospels, or the lost books of the Bible, or the Apocrypha. There's a lot of information that was taken out, and our attention is focused on certain things, but not our own abilities that we have. Again, and I would point towards the Buddhist or the Hindu tradition as the closest thing that we know of to what was going on.
Okay. Yeah, I can agree with that.
So if I may, Alfred, I want to kind of go into this next one from a piece on who are the Nazis really.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So the Holy Roman Empire, were the Habsburgs. The imperial throne was occupied by the House of Habsburg, and it was considered one of the most distinguished and influential royal houses of Europe, in addition to Portugal and Spain, and produced the kings of Bohemia, Hungary, Croatia, Galicia, and the emperors of Hungary, Austria-Hungary, and Mexico, and principalities in the Netherlands and Italy. Very powerful. This was the daughter of King James the Sixth of Scotland and First of England, and that would be the King James version of the Bible, King James. And her name was Elizabeth of Bohemia. And she was the wife of Frederick V. And it was through their marriage that the Hanoverian house came, which would have been George I. And that's significant because the Hanoverians originated from the line of Stuart through their daughter, Princess Sophia. Well, actually, their daughter was named the heir presumptive to the thrones of England and Ireland by the 1701 Act of Settlement. Again, this is what's in the historical record. And we're told that it was to settle the succession of the crowns of England and Ireland on Protestants only. And Sophia was the next Protestant in line for the throne. But she died on June 8th of 1714, and Queen Anne, next in line, on August 1st of 1714. and Sophia's son became King George I on August 1st of 1714. So that line came through the Stuart line. But you have these two different portraits of King James out there, and this is typical. I mean, if you really start looking, this is why I say there was a whitewash, and that I think that this was related to the 12 tribes of Israel as well. So that kind of throws another layer in there. Jacob. And this was James Francis Edward Stuart, the son of King James II, who was deposed in the Glorious Revolution of 1688 by William and Mary. And he was supposed to be the heir to the throne, but he wasn't able to get in there. He left for Britain for exile in France in 1717. So that would have been in the midpoint year. And again, I can find different portraits, which there appears to have been a whitewash. Again, it's out there. And then I kind of go through that whole idea about, so we've got Jacob up here, and then talking about that in the Bible and the 12 tribes of Israel coming through Jacob. And so I think there's a connection found in the Scottish House of Stuart that's missing from the collective awareness, because that information and all information about the tribes of Israel throughout the world was deliberately removed. And we hear about the lost tribes of Israel. That's all that we get about it. And at what point did the Hebrew Israelites become the Jews that we know today? And that's where the Ashkenazi come in. That's one group. The German Jews and France and Eastern Europe and their descendants, with Ashkenaz saying to refer to Germany in Hebrew. The Sephardic Jews are the Jews of Spain, Portugal, North Africa, and Middle East, and the Hebrew word Sepharad refers to Spain. And Mizrahi Jews, meaning east, and those Jews that went east. So there's a lot of things with the Ashkenazic Jews, I think, that tie into what we're experiencing now. It's not an area of expertise of mine per se, but I do know that there was this infiltration of these malevolent forces into certain groups, and I think this is one area that took place, and I'm going to cover that here in just a minute.
One thing I can add real quick is the people with reptilian soul calls themselves of nobility. And when someone else tried to take power in any of these thrones, if they weren't one of them, they could say, you're not of nobility, you can't rule or be on the throne. I've read that in a few places, and that figures in with the people of nobility had their reptilian souls.
I think that's true of the ones that hijacked everything. And I'm going to get into that here in just a minute.
Great.
Okay, so I was talking about how prominent the Habsburgs were. Well, the extension of their male line ended in 1740 with the death of Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI. And that's a portrait that I found of him. The War of Austrian Succession started in December of 1740 and lasted 8 years, in which we are told was the last great power conflict with the Bourbon Habsburg dynastic conflict at its heart, when Maria Theresa was acceded to the throne, and she lost it. It got taken from her, the last of the Habsburg rulers. And this marked the rise of Prussia as a major power, with Prussia gaining lands and Austria losing lands. Yeah, this is the start of how all of this came down. How did they take it all down? what and who else shows up in the 1740 time period. And I believe the Great Frost of Ireland was the rip in space-time that allowed the controllers to start coming in. This is in the historical record. David Dixon talks about the event in his book, Arctic Ireland, The Extraordinary Story of the Great Frost and Forgotten Famine of 1740-1741, during which time the Irish population endured 21 months of bizarre weather without known precedent that defied conventional explanation. And the cause was not known. And so I've speculated that the Philadelphia experiment took the USS Eldridge back in time to that place in 1740, 1741, ripped the fabric of space-time. And that when the Eldridge came back, if you're familiar with the story, the men that had been on the Eldridge were like embedded in the ship itself. They were in terrible shape when they came back, the ones that weren't fused to the hull of the ship. They experienced all kinds of problems. So I don't think the ship just disappeared. I think it went somewhere. And I believe that because of how I synchronistically came into awareness of this information. I think there's a connection to it.
Okay. Shall I ask you questions here or later or what?
Let me go through a couple more things,
Okay,
and then
sure.
we can pause.
Sure.
Okay. So that's where I'm going and saying I have speculated that it was a causal factor in the mud flood, but I'm really comfortable with it at least being the event that brought in the non-human souls. But something, I mean, if you look at pictures like that, where you have, this old architecture, and similar examples of which exist to this day, again, all over, but we've been told it was built at a different time in more modern history, so we don't think anything of it, but it's all old world architecture. And you see those train tracks in the, being dug out, pulled by mules, buggies pulled by mules doing that work. Okay, so what else happened? Around 1740, 1741, the Royal Order of Scotland was founded in 1741, which is an order within the structure of Freemasonry whose members are invited to join based on advanced Masonic criteria. And so when I found that information out, I couldn't help but notice that the star or whatever is in this logo design looks a lot like the Jesuit symbol. Let's say the sun rays, because they both resemble the black sun symbol. And that's one version. There's another version of it as well, where the lines are a lot more squiggly. And this symbol surfaces in Nazi Germany in Wewelsburg Castle, in the floor of Wewelsburg Castle that Himmler built. Okay. And I'll cover that here in just a second. So Mayor Amschel Rothschild shows up in 1744. And he established his banking business in Germany in the 1760s. And that was the start of the international banking and very wealthy Ashkenazi Jewish family. And then his son Nathan was sent to England, and he established a bank in the city of London in 1804. And then the city of London is the primary central business district of London. And all of the major banks today operate from the city. And the Queen herself has to have permission to go there. And again, if you look at this map, the city of London, one Moorgate place just kind of pops out. The name is found in many different places. And then in 1748, Adam Weishaupt was born, and he was the founder of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati. And he went to a Jesuit school at the age of 7 and was initiated into Freemasonry in 1777. Okay, so I have heard people say that he was actually George Washington, but I'm not going to go there I don't know, but that's another thing that's just out there. Okay, so this is the Hofburg Palace in Vienna. And I mean, it's just massive, ornate architecture. It's beautiful. And that's where the imperial treasury is of the House of Habsburg. And their crowns and scepters and, you know, the jewels and the beauty of these, the orb. I mean, I think these are more significant than just symbolic pieces. I think they actually had a function on the Earth grid, but I don't know a whole lot about that. But I've seen a video that talked about that. And what's really interesting about the imperial treasury is that when the first thing that Hitler did when he got to Vienna in 1939 was get these artifacts out of the treasury and take them to Germany, to Nuremberg. First thing he did. And I covered that here later on.
Well, it was also the spear of the spear of Longinus was one of the first things he saw, according to one book that I read.
That's correct, and I actually do have that in here somewhere. There it is.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that here in just a second. So these are some of the things that I found with the same type of design of 8-pointed stars that you see here on the coronation robe of the Holy Roman Emperors, the House of Habsburg. You see this, you know, one square and then the other square forming an 8-pointed star. And I've seen that in ceiling designs of abandoned theaters. This was an old Lowe's theater before it got torn down after having been abandoned. And you see an 8-pointed star here. But then you also see it in Iran, in the largest mosque in the world by area, which is the Imam Reza Shrine in Mashhad, Iran. You see, same symbol. You see it in Pakistan at the Lahore, at the Shalimar Gardens at the Lahore Fort, right there. And another name of the 1851 Great Exhibition, the Crystal Palace, is the Great Shalimar. That was the first time I looked this up, was, oh, I wonder what that is all about. The Holy Lance, or Lance of Longinus, or Spear of Destiny, is there, and the belief was that whoever possessed it would be invincible and capable of ruling the world, and that it was the lance that the Roman centurion Longinus used to pierce Jesus's side when he was on the cross. There are other spears of destiny in different places, but this one is, I think, particularly well known for its connection to Hitler. Okay, so again, with the question of how did they dismantle the original civilization? And in 1814, the Oldenburg monarchy of the Union of the Kingdom of Denmark and Norway came to an end because of the Napoleonic Wars. It was neutral during the wars, but they were instigated into choosing the side of Napoleon because the British, you know, with the stated reason that Napoleon was afraid that they were afraid that Napoleon would attempt to conquer the Danish-Norwegian fleet. They used that as a pretext to attack Copenhagen in what became known as the Siege of Copenhagen in 1807. And the British seized the Danish-Norwegian fleet in September of 1807. And it's called the fleet robbery that drew Denmark-Norway into the war on the side of Napoleon. Then in 1814, the Treaty of Kiel between the United Kingdom and Sweden on the anti-French side and Norway and Denmark on the French side dissolved the Oldenburg monarchy by transferring Norway to the King of Sweden. And then the king of Denmark retained the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Iceland. Now, this is an example of how they started taking over countries that had stable hereditary ruling systems, whether it was monarchies or empires, imperial.
Who is they? They, when you say they, could you identify the they?
So the beings behind this takeover.
Yeah, but I mean, who was taking over who?
They were, okay. So, for example, I think the Napoleonic Wars were used by the Rothschilds and the families at the time that were behind the scenes, doing things to instigate conflicts to facilitate this process of taking over these well-established countries. They were using war to facilitate that process. And again, there's a lot of stuff I don't know, but this is what's in the historical record. And there's just a lot of really suspect stuff, and I'll cover that when I get to Bismarck, because that's a really good example, Otto von Bismarck.
Okay.
Okay. And again, this is not something that I know a whole lot about. It's something that I've read, that Mayor Rothschild or the Rothschild family caused a panic in Britain about Napoleon and the Battle of Waterloo, saying, hey, Napoleon's going to win, or something like that. And he was able to go in and clean up financially because of that. Again, I can't quote a source for that, but I do remember hearing something along those lines.
I know a little bit about that. It was undecided who was going to win the war. And Rothschilds got information delivered by carrier pigeon way ahead of everybody else. So he was in the place where they sell the stocks and bonds and all that. And it was bad for England if Napoleon won the war. And so at first he acted like he won the war and started selling his stuff and tried to make it look like it was a secret or something like that. And then he sold his stuff real fast. And then everybody else started selling their stuff, figuring that it was going to be worthless. And then he had and then when the prices got real low, just a few percent of what they were initially worth, he had all his agents buy up everything. And he increased his wealth like 5,000 times in one day there. And he was like the wealthiest man in England after that, or his family was.
That's pretty much what I've heard, that was the case. Okay, so thank you.
Okay.
So at the conclusion of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, most of what was the Holy Roman Empire was included in the German Confederation as a result of the Congress of Vienna, which was said to be one of the most important international conferences in European history. So as a meeting of ambassadors of European states in Vienna between 1814 and 1815 to remake Europe after the downfall of Napoleon, with the stated goal of resizing the main powers so they could balance each other and in this way remain at peace and not simply restore old boundaries. So this is the concept about balance of power diplomacy, which is at the root of a lot of conflicts during the 19th and 20th centuries. And Prussia, Austria, and Russia made major territorial gains as a result of the Congress of Vienna. This is interesting because most of the discussions took place in informal face-to-face sessions among the ambassadors of Austria, Britain, France, Russia, and sometimes Prussia, with limited or no participation by other delegates. And so the Congress of Vienna never met in plenary session, which means a session in which all members of all parties are able to attend. So they're excluding other countries from participating. They're deciding amongst the great powers who's going to get what, making all these deals with each other. And then the Rothschilds purchased Jerusalem in 1829, and then they subsequently acquired considerable land in Palestine in the 1800s and early 1900s. Okay, so that's significant. Just need a homeland. Where are they going to go? Homeland called Israel. Queen Victoria's reign began on June 20th of 1837 and lasted for almost 64 years. And she died January 22nd of 1901. And her reign was described as a period of cultural, industrial, political, scientific, and military change within the United Kingdom, marked by a great expansion of the British Empire. And, you know, I talked about the Crystal Palace exhibition. All indicators are pointing there. And this is kind of what I want to bring up with this, the whole idea of non-human souls and probably even reptilian souls, is that Queen Victoria is the originator of the hemophilia gene in her descendants in the royal families of Europe. And it was considered to be a spontaneous mutation. So she didn't have hemophilia herself, but a number of her descendants did. And I don't know if you can tell or not, but the ones here outlined in red with the red type are her descendants that had hemophilia, one of which was Alexei Nikolaevich of Russia, which had such huge implications for Russia in the early 1900s, with Rasputin and all of that, and how he came in to have a lot of power. So it wasn't inconsequential. So I guess part of me bringing this in is why is this problem coming up with blood clotting in her descendants that didn't exist before? You know, and I think we've been told that it was because of the inbreeding of the royal families. They wouldn't marry outside of their bloodlines. But I definitely wonder if there's another explanation for having this issue with blood clotting.
They had to always pick a woman that had a reptilian soul. I can add something a little more if you could go back to those maps of Israel there. Okay, when they created Israel, it was done through the United Nations. And even though the Palestinians had a higher population than the Jews, as you know, the United Nations is controlled by people with reptilian souls. And so they split up Israel about 60-40, where the Jews got around 60% of the land. And as I say on my website and other places, about 41% of the people with reptilian souls identify as Jewish. So Israel has maybe the highest percentage population of reptilians as any country. And they initially decided that they're going to try to take all this land and kick the Palestinians out. And as you can see, each 10 years, it shows how the Palestinians got less and less land. There in the yellow. Before it started, they had all the land, and then the Jews came and they showed a little land, and then the United Nations came in, and you can see the green is the Jews. They got over half. And every 10 years, by using terrorism and war and killing and all that, they've knocked it down to, you can see the latest there, where they have looks like to me over 80%. Okay, that's about it on that.
Yeah. Well, there's a document out there that we're told is a forgery, but it's called the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, if you've heard of it before.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be talking about a Jewish plan to dominate the world. And I just want to be careful because it's not what we're talking about is not about individual, people within a religion. I mean, we've all been lied to about a lot of things. And so, by tampering with our spirituality and our spiritual beliefs, it's not a broad brush
Is she really talking
statement by any stretch of the imagination. It's not saying, but it's within certain groups and people that there was this infiltration. I think for a reason, that the whole idea of the children of Israel being God's children and, kind of taking over that identity from the real children of Israel, of which involves the whole of humanity, with human souls.
So that document's kind of about people with reptilian souls, but they don't want to say that, of course. They want to keep that fact a secret, that anybody in humanity doesn't have a human soul. They don't want to let that out. And even though I tell everybody, people have trouble accepting that or repeating it. Alfred's about the only one with a voice on the internet that is willing to repeat that I keep saying, or that I came up with. Go ahead.
Okay. Alfred, do you have anything before I go on? You're muted.
Well, I'm just following I'm following the presentation here, and I just want to let you make your case rather than be, that much of an interrupter. So please continue.
Okay. So in the 1840s, the Emperor of Brazil, Pedro II, issued an imperial decree ordering the construction of a settlement to be formed at Petropolis with the arrival of German immigrants. So we have Germans again. And it's a German colonized mountain town, 42 miles or 68 kilometers north of Rio de Janeiro. So this is a structure in Petropolis, which I thought was really interesting. Massive, and then what's this blue globe doing up here? What's going on there? Again, I think it's what people call antiquitech. That these buildings built by the original civilization were serving some kind of function on the Earth's grid system, and intrinsically connected to each other. Canals are another thing. I mean, canals all over the Earth. And the first cinema was said to have opened in Petropolis in 1897. And the first films that were produced ever were the Lumiere brothers. And so it was considered the breakthrough of projected cinematography. And this is the beginning of the use of films as a media to mold our perception. And I'll give some more examples here in just a minute. So the premiere is in a German colony of Brazil. Okay, lots going on with the 1848 revolutions to start to take down the original rulers, monarchs throughout Europe. And a lot of the immigration to North America came from this time period. I'm just going to go through here, fast forward here a little bit. Oh, this is interesting. Let me stop here for a second. Okay. So at this assembly called the Frankfurt National Assembly in May 18th of 1848, where they're trying to get this German nation put together, there was a declaration that was promulgated by the assembly called Basic Rights for the German People. And a constitution was passed with Germany to be a constitutional monarchy and the office of head of state occupied hereditarily by whoever the king of Prussia was. And it fell flat. It was dissolved. And by 1851, the basic rights had been abolished nearly everywhere. But what's really, really interesting about this, and I hope you can see it, is that these three women are standing on a reptile.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a broken chain visible. And you see the same thing with the House of Windsor. You don't have a reptile in it, but you have a broken chain around the hoof of the unicorn.
So they're showing that they took the reptilians out of power, and then the reptilians got the whole thing dissolved and got their power back.
But I think that's significant right there. It doesn't come out and say what a reptile is doing in that illustration, but I didn't notice it at first. I was just looking for something to put up about the.
I'm just guessing that's what it is, and it seems likely.
Yeah, so that didn't fly. No basic rights proclamation for humanity.
Yeah, they don't want that. They want their rules where they can step on everybody and all that.
So one of my queries at looking at all of this is, were all the events we have seen thus far orchestrated as part of a plan to take down the ancient civilizations, royal houses of Europe, and stable governments and replace them with new forms of government made to sound very positive for the people, but which could be manipulated for certain preferred outcomes? Not for our best interests, in the guise of individual liberty and democracy. And I'm going to go through some more information about the Second Reich, the German Reich, which was masterminded by Otto von Bismarck, who was behind the unification of Germany in 1871, and he was the first chancellor. And this dude was involved in a heck of a lot.
He was human.
No, maybe, but he was really involved in a lot.
That's what I get. Yeah.
So let me go through this real quick. So he was said to have skillfully used balance of power diplomacy to maintain Germany's position for 20 years in a peaceful Europe. At the same time, the way he unified Germany was by provoking 3 short decisive wars with Denmark, Austria, and France, and by abolishing the supranational German Confederation and formed the German Empire, which excluded Austria. And that was a factor with Hitler in World War II. The Second French Empire had started with Emperor Napoleon III in 1852. And he was manipulated into war with the Germans or with Prussia or whoever it ended up being by dispatching the Ems telegram on July 14th of 1870 that Bismarck sent to him, where Wilhelm, I think, was the emperor or the king of Prussia at the time, insulted the French ambassador, and that Napoleon III declared war on Prussia, making France look like the aggressor nation. So that was said to have been sent out by Bismarck.
Let me add something real fast. Napoleon had a reptilian soul, and you can see a picture of him with putting his hand inside his vest. Anytime you see a picture with the person putting their hand inside the vest, that indicates they have a reptilian soul and they're part of that group. Go ahead.
Bismarck also, and as a result of the war, Bismarck annexed Alsace-Lorraine on the border with Germany. And both of those acts, refusing or not including Austria in the German Empire, and by annexing Alsace-Lorraine, were both factors in World War I and World War II, because France wanted Alsace-Lorraine back. And Hitler was not happy with Austria not being part of the German Empire. Okay. Then you have, in 1871, you have the short-lived Paris Commune, established March 28th of 1871, where a radical socialist, anti-religious, and revolutionary government was put down by the French army. It was a very short-lived event, but it was written about by Karl Marx. And in June of 1871, he published The Civil War in France, about the significance of the struggle of the communards in the Paris Commune. So you've got the roots of communism popping up here. And unfortunately, communism is a big part of what is playing out right now. This desire to put this type of government in place that is ultimately anti-human and a means for control, socialism and communism. And Albert Pike, who is a prominent American Freemason, was said to have said in 1871, the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic, I guess it's world or something like that, or just can't see behind his head, and political Zionism, which is called the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. So again, that's out there attributed to him. And again, I think that's part of what's been playing out. I don't think it's what's going to end up.
Yeah, is it happening now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to pull out of this. I really do. My own personal belief system is this planet's going to be liberated. But these are the dynamics that have been driving our historical narrative and the world that we live in.
I can add something about all these different political systems where you got capitalism or communism or socialism, whatever, or a monarchy. The main thing is who's running it, who's in charge. If you got those people with reptilian souls running it, doesn't matter which one you have, it's going to be horrible. Eventually, faster if it's communism, maybe. And if you got honest, positive people that are polarized positive, you might be able to have any of those systems and have a flourishing society. It's more about if you got bad people in charge than it is the system is more important.
Right. And we're living in a world that has not been constructed to benefit humanity, unfortunately.
Right. Reptilian in charge of almost every country.
So Marcus Lowe was a pioneer of the motion picture industry, so start bringing films back in, founding Lowe's Theaters in 1904. And he was the founder of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios in 1924. And so we're taught he didn't have anything when he was growing up. He had a little formal education, but that he was able to save enough money to buy into the penny arcade business. And this was his first investment. And that's significant because that led to these interactive games, coin-operated entertainment business with well-developed manufacturing and distribution channels around the world, and computer technology that had become cheap enough to incorporate into the mass market entertainment products. So there's a direct connection between these penny arcades and the development of interactive games. And, oh, by the way, which you find in movie theaters. So they're developing a technology that will make them even richer, and get people into this distracted mode of, going to the theater or playing these games and just, putting, quarter after quarter into these machines. I mean, they're sucking the wealth up. There's so many different ways that they did that.
Pinball, yeah.
And then you have the Nickelodeons, you have Paramount Pictures coming about with founded by Adolf Zukor. And then you have writers, like Jack London, considered to be one of the first successful American writers. He was an advocate of socialism, and he published a book called The Iron Heel in 1908, which refers to the rise of an oligarchic tyranny in the United States. The Iron Heel. What's happy about that?
He's a reptilian. That's the way he wants it.
The storyline emphasized future changes in society and politics and not technological changes. It's called a dystopian novel, meaning characterized by mass poverty, public mistrust and suspicion, a police state or oppression. And he was said to have Marxist beliefs, espousing a progression from feudalism through capitalism, then socialism, and then ending in a period without a state known as communism. I mean, these are the books that we have to read in school. I don't ever remember that one, but I sure as heck remember The Call of the Wild.
Yeah.
And then they make it into movies over and over and over again.
Because the reptilians in control.
But the storyline is that it was about a dog that was stolen from his happy home, sold into service as a sled dog in Alaska, terribly abused by the humans he came into contact with, and he became feral and answered the call of the wild. And then we had that kind of storyline that's basically shoved down our throats with books like that, with Lord of the Flies, with these, these storylines are highly questionable, being imprinted on young minds and then reinforced by movies.
And then they go the other way where they constantly have the broke orphan that had a horrible life as a kid. And by the time he's in early 20s, he's like a huge business tycoon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a phony story every time. And it's always a person with a reptilian soul. They're trying to tell everybody, anybody can be president, anybody can own all this, anybody can have it. But the truth is, you can unless you got a reptilian soul. You don't have much of a shot because they're the ones controlling it all.
That story applies to the founder of Molson
Right.
in Canada. It applies to Jack Daniels. It applies to the founder of Seagram's.
Yeah, there's a lot of
same
it.
story.
Same
And
story.
again, pushing, and those examples pushing alcohol.
Yeah, it's a phony bullshit story every time.
And then
the reptilian, that's the business tycoon.
And then Bismarck was the organizer of the Berlin Conference in 1884, November of 1884, which lasted a couple of months, during which time the entire continent of Africa was carved up between the European powers. So, there's a lot of, this is a big deal kind of thing. And
Germany didn't get very much according to the map.
well, okay, so it's like they hear, terrible things happened here. And I will talk about that here in just a minute because it's included in here. This is the German Empire in this part of the world, in the South Pacific, part of German New Guinea. And that lasted from 1884 to 1919. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I'd never heard about the German New Guinea until I started doing this research work. No idea the Germans were in the South Pacific.
They took everything away from them after World War I.
They did, and that set the stage for World War II, because you have Franz Ferdinand assassinated, which started World War I, and he was the heir presumptive to the throne of Austria-Hungary, by a socialist student, Gavrilo Princip. This is all stuff I remember learning about. I was a history buff. I loved history, to study history. And then you get into the balance of power stuff. And so within a short period of time, war was declared between Austria-Hungary and Serbia and their respective allies, which led to World War I, which saw unprecedented levels of carnage and destruction. And also a lot of the original civilization was destroyed, as it was during World War II. Treaty of Versailles was signed June 28th of 1919. And then you have the War Guilt Clause, which required Germany and other Central Powers as well to accept responsibility for causing all the loss and damage during the war.
Yeah, what a mistake. They'd be disarming before they did that.
So that didn't sit well. And again, so like the Ottoman Empire was also on the losing side of the war, and it was partitioned in 1914. Gone. No more Ottoman Empire. And this, again, this is part and parcel of their modus operandi on how they deconstructed the original civilization. I'm going to kind of go over this. This is about the Romanovs and how all of that played out. And then the whole family was murdered by the Bolsheviks on July 16th of 1918. So get rid of the original family. We don't want them around, you know, and the beginnings of communism in Russia or Soviet Union. Okay. You have the Balfour Declaration of 1917 announcing support for the establishment of a national homeland for the Jewish people, written by Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild. And then you have a really bizarre movement called Surrealism that started around 1917, and Salvador Dali was part of that. But this guy, Andre Breton, was a Marxist, and they were intent on rejecting logic, reason, and aestheticism, and express nonsense, irrationality, and anti-capitalism in the surrealistic works.
Has to be reptilian to do that.
And so he wrote what is called the Surrealism Manifesto starting in 1924, seeking to overthrow the oppressive rules of modern society by demolishing the backbone of rational thought, by tapping into this, what they call the superior reality of the subconscious mind.
They're trying to do it again with defunding the police.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm asking, you know, everybody listening to this call, is what we're experiencing surreal or not? It's surreal. You know, so these are movements that have been seeded into our consciousnesses, if you will, by, you know, continuing to reduce our capacity for critical thinking and to condition us to accept what we're told.
Antifa.
And it's, you know, it's just, you know, the people that are awake are going WTF, and the rest are saying, you know, pointing a finger and saying this, and, you know, all the things that have happened in this last year, which under normal circumstances, you know, nobody would buy that the riots were peaceful protests.
Yeah, or the fake virus that don't exist.
It's surreal, you know, and we're kind of been living through that here lately. Okay, so the Weimar Republic was between the end of the German Empire and the beginning of Nazi Germany. Now, this again plays into what we're seeing right now. This is the beginning of that whole transgender thing, I think. It might have been going on somewhere else, but it was definitely going on here. So it was characterized by economic troubles, weak government, and decadent parties. So tea and tobacco dried up quickly, but almost all drugs, including cocaine and heroin, were legal to buy. And the city of Berlin was awash with drugs. Gender rules were smashed. Many Germans were financially ruined. Prostitution, all ages to make a living, men and women. Cabarets and dance halls were booming. Hard drugs frequently given to customers for free when they've got it and went in there. And androgyny was all the rage in Berlin cabarets, with some of the most popular acts being male and female impersonators. Okay, so you get the free drinks in Las Vegas today. You get the drag stuff going on in Las Vegas now. The movie Victor Victoria had its origins in the Weimar Republic era, and then it was remade to Victor Victoria. And then you have a problem with transgenderism.
I can explain that a little bit so people can understand it better. Before you're born, when you're on the soul plane, every soul has a preferred gender that it likes to be. And the soul gets to pick its preferred gender 93% of the time. But 7% of the time, you got to pick a life where you're the other gender. So when you incarnate, as usual, the mind starts at the moment you incarnate, and the mind starts out empty, where you're learning experiences as you go along. And in third density, the soul can only guide the mind. It can't feed that much information into the mind. But since the person is the wrong gender that they usually are, they're confused, and the mind's getting some signals from the soul. Hey, this ain't right. We're the wrong gender here. Something's wrong. And that's why people want to be gay or transgender or get a sex change operation of all that stuff, because they're in that 7% category. And these people running our society, the people with reptilian souls, they latch onto that hook, line, and sinker and try to promote that and push it as much as they can, because it means a screwed up person that ain't going to have a family, and they got less people to rule. And since that persons don't have a family and they're all confused, they'll be real easy to control that person as well. So they got all kinds of books and everything to promote that stuff and take advantage of those people that are in that 7% category. Go ahead.
I mean, it definitely seems like there's an agenda around it. It's particularly noticeable these days. The swastika was derived from a positive symbol with the word swastika in Sanskrit, meaning conducive to well-being. And this picture was taken at a Diwali Festival of Lights. But it was the central element of the National Socialist Party flag in 1920 and became the symbol of brutality, fascism, and genocide. I'm going to kind of pass over this about the Aryans, but it's kind of interesting as to who they're actually talking about and why they're so obsessed with creating a master race. You know, I think the original Aryans were the master race, and they were desperate. The Nazis and whoever were desperately trying to figure out how to recreate that. But unfortunately, I think they used trauma-based conditioning to create the psychic abilities instead of, you know, natural ones that lead to the same result.
That might be a Jewish story to badmouth the Germans too. Some of that.
I think, I mean, this, you know, giant humans. I mean, I think there's,
Oh, I wasn't.
they were capable of carving massive infrastructure right out of the rock, like it was no big deal. And I've got examples of that throughout my work.
I meant
It's pretty
Hitler,
amazing.
the master race concerning Hitler.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah.
probably a lot in there. So like this is Petra in Jordan, and this is cut out of rock. It's
Yeah, I've
amazing.
seen a lot of that. Like I was
Yeah.
reading about that. Seen a lot
This
of
is
pictures.
this is a massive structure. It's hard to tell the size of this, but it's massive. Okay, so I'm going to pass through that. Arata is said to be the oldest civilization, going back 21,000 years, or dating to 22,000 BC. I'm sorry, that spread all over the world. And again, I think those were the original humans. So this is on the Crimean Peninsula, off of the Black Sea, and this is in India, and you can see two very similar architectural styles there. Okay, when people talk about Tartaria or Tartary, which was in northern and central Asia, the Barbary Coast or Barbaria was the name of a vast region stretching from the Nile River Delta across northern Africa to the Canary Islands. Gandhara was an ancient Buddhist kingdom in what is now Pakistan. Arabia, Arizona, you get the R sound in all of these places. Kumari, Kandam, K-A-N-D-A-M. So my question is, who were the Aryans really? And then you start to get into pan-Germanism and Hitler's policy of back home to the Reich. And he wanted ethnic Germans living in Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the western districts of Poland to come back home. This is the annexation of Austria to Germany's Third Reich on April 10th of 1938 in Vienna.
Peaceful.
And then they went straight for the crown jewels of the Holy Roman Empire and the Spear of Destiny. And that was kept in a bunker underneath Nuremberg Castle during the war. And that was recovered by Allied forces at the end of the war. Eventually, all of them were returned eventually. Okay. And then you get the Black Sun, the whole idea of the Black Sun, which I've heard recently was a connection to Saturn. And this is the Black Sun symbol in Himmler's Wewelsburg Castle. And there was this aspect of the Black Sun on the SS logo. Sorry. Okay, so this aspect of the Black Sun. Hitler was not a nice man. His SS was a major paramilitary organization headed by Himmler and was the foremost agency of security, surveillance, and terror within Germany, in German-occupied Europe. This became the center for the SS. And they had these plans for genocide and ethnic cleansing on a vast scale, and colonization of Central and Eastern Europe by Germany, which directly and indirectly led to the deaths of millions by shooting, starvation, disease, and extermination through labor and genocide. The general Plan Ost, and he was the main director of the building of concentration and extermination camps, which started, let's see, the policy for systematic genocide was formulated at the Wannsee Conference of 1942 near Berlin. And what we're told is resulted in the killing of 90% of Poland's Jews and 2/3 of the Jewish population of Europe. Okay, this is what's available. Gypsies were targeted, and then
That might be untrue.
Piles of large bones like this from a concentration camp in Poland. And then there was this genocide in Africa around in the early 1900s, and it was the first genocide of the 20th century, which was waged by the German Empire between 1904 and 1908 against these people in what was German Southwest Africa and now Namibia. And the Whitaker Report of 1985 determined that the aftermath was an attempt to exterminate these peoples. Okay. And the San, who are also known as the Bushmen, are considered the oldest inhabitants of Southern Africa, with a history that's said to date back at least 20,000 years, and are among the oldest people. It's just talking about experimentation conducted, what happened in the Channel Islands with occupation, and rules that were established of things that they were allowed to do and not do. And the Channel Islands were the only place in what would be called the British Isles, even though they're more like I can't think of the term off the top of my head, but they're part of Britain, even though they're right next to France.
Yeah, I was exploring those. I asked somebody that lived there. He said that they're owned by England, but they're kind of run by themselves.
So they were occupied pretty much the entirety of the war.
Right.
So I mean, my question is, isn't it strange the British government opened the door wide to the German forces to immediately walk in and occupy the Channel Islands? Because they're
so close to France and they occupied France, maybe they couldn't defend it.
Yeah, it was like the German occupation of Jersey, for example, started 1 week after the British government demilitarized the island, for fearing for the safety of civilians should there be any conflict. Okay, so the reason doesn't really make sense. The Germans just swept in and took over, and it's really a sad chapter.
You got to keep in mind all this stuff you read about World War II was written by reptilian Jews, and a lot of it's untrue to make Germany look bad. And in some cases they were, in some cases they weren't. I don't think Hitler was that bad, but some of the people around him that had reptilian souls were.
Yeah, it's really hard to know because so much has been manipulated and kept from us about what's really going on here. And
they try to get as much sympathy for the Jews as they can, and to help them in business interests worldwide. I forget, there's another reason too, but all the stuff read in all the colleges and schools on World War II is all written by reptilian Jews, and most of it is somewhat untrue.
So what the Germans were said to have been doing on the Channel Islands was building the Atlantic Wall fortifications. One of the largest building works of the 20th century, said to have been built by forced labor during World War II, envisioned to make an Allied invasion of the Western European mainland from the sea impossible. Now, I've done a close look at the Channel Islands, and I'm pretty sure this stuff is already there. So I'm not really sure what they were doing, but they did have a number of concentration camps on the island, especially Alderney. So they're doing all this work on this impenetrable fortress, yet the Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy on June 6th of 1944, known to us in history as D-Day, and most of the coastal defenses there were stormed within hours. So they're doing all this work to create this impenetrable fortress, and it's taken over within hours.
And D-Day standed for Devil's Day. It was the 6th month, the 6th day, and the 6th hour that it happened. And Germany, that was controlling France, it was peaceful the whole time, and a lot of the French women wanted to marry some of the German soldiers, and they could have came up through Italy and did everything they did, but instead they decided to go that way, and they did massive bombing, and they killed thousands of people and left millions homeless in France when it didn't need to be that way. Destroyed all kinds of stuff. It was totally a reptilian operation what they did on D-Day.
And the process you just described, Gary, I'm not going to go into it because I know we're kind of running long already, but I have started to look at the history since 1945, and I'm doing it in parts. My first part was 1945 to 1960, and that same type of process has been repeated over and over and over again of creating the conditions for conflict, moving, uprooting people, moving, one group north and one group south. That happened in India with the Hindus and the Muslims, creating hardship. That happened in Vietnam in 1954 when Vietnam was split at the 17th parallel, and a lot of people moved south and fewer moved north, but it was still a period of disruption. And those are just two examples of this, this engineered crises, seriously harming a lot of people by creating the chaos and whatnot of uprooting people from their homes.
They did it another way too with that Gandhi, who had a reptilian soul. He told everybody, no matter what, don't fight back. So like 1 million Indians just got totally massacred by the Islamists coming in.
And actually I have a little bit of a different take on that, Gary, because of my research. I think it was orchestrated. Gandhi led a nonviolent protest against the British for 25 years.
Right.
And right after independence is declared, and this, Pakistan and India are turned into two different countries, this movement started. And then Gandhi was assassinated in 1948. And again, I don't know about anybody else, but I watched the movie Gandhi many years ago. I was kind of a fan of this nonviolent protest leader and all this stuff.
Who do you think wrote the movie Reptilians? You didn't get the right true story.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So what we are led to believe is that Gandhi's movement led to the independence of India from the British. But in fact, the independence of India, this movement started, this partition started, and this, brutal displacement of people started right on independence. And so Gandhi's movement had nothing to do.
They make the reptilian guy look as good as possible in all the Hollywood movies and all the books written by them. They do a lot of lying and misleading. You don't get the true story when it's one reptilian writing about another reptilian. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I've really, really delved into this, and situations were set up for failure and to allow other forces to come in and take over everything. I mean, like the whole situation with what happened in Tibet and to the Tibetan people, and the atrocities that they've endured in the loss of their country, and the torture and the abuse and the death for speaking out. And this kind of stuff is what's in our modern history books. It's the stuff we're allowed to know. And what makes the job of piecing it together so much harder is we've all been educated in this. So to see and understand that there are different angles to look at that show that this has not been a happy time for humanity. It's never been about our progress, because The controllers don't want us to progress. They want us to regress. And, thankfully, we're living in this age of awakening to where I think there's enough people that are awake to so many more things, especially on the galactic level. And Alfred, that's one thing I really appreciate about being here with you, is that it's so much more than Earth. I mean, there's so much more involved, and most people don't know about that galactic element as well. So it's kind of like a multidimensional platform, if you will. So anyway, let me just kind of get on here. So we've got Israel forming on May 14th of 1948. And by the end of the day of the announcement of Israel's formation, there was already fighting between the Palestinians and the Jewish settlers. And Egypt had attacked by that night, an aerial attack. So didn't even get out of the first 24 hours, and there was already a conflict starting up.
They bombed a hotel, didn't they, somewhere along the line?
Yeah, it's, just from the get-go, situation for conflict ready-made. And so my questions at the beginning of this were, who are the Nazis really? And to sum up what I've been going over is I believe the Nazis are malevolent non-human beings who found a way to incarnate on Earth in human form, starting in the 1740s. And I gave examples of Mayor Rothschild and Adam Weishaupt as having been born during that time. So I believe the Nazis were actually in existence long before World War II. I do not believe they were defeated in World War II, as we've been taught. They're clearly not our friends and have committed an unbelievable number of crimes against humanity, continuing well into the present day. They have tricked us into worshiping them, robbed us of our true history and heritage, and humanity has no value to them except as an energy source and commodity. They hate us and need us for their survival and wealth at the same time. Was there a Fourth Reich planned?
Maybe.
So since I can't prove anything, but this is stuff that's been out there in alternative media for a while. Like this rumor that Angela Merkel was Hitler's daughter, and there being some kind of facial resemblance.
Supposed to have 3 daughters, right?
Yeah, there's kind of a similarity between Rod Rosenstein and Heinrich Himmler, and I had come across that somewhere. Operation Paperclip, where U.S. intelligence brought Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians to the United States following the end of the Second World War. And so here you have from 1945 to 1955, Operation Paperclip granted nearly 1,000 German scientists American citizenship. Many had been longtime members of the Nazi Party and the Gestapo and had conducted experiments on humans at concentration camps and committed other war crimes. The scientists ended up in the United States military-industrial complex, worked with the CIA, NASA, and more. And one of the Nazi experiments that continued in America was mind control, known as the CIA's Project MKUltra.
I get 100% of them had reptilian souls. 100% I get. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's what I get.
You had the whole Operation High Jump, with the idea that Admiral Byrd went down there with his fleet and they got harassed by flying saucers, believed to have been built by the Nazis.
Lost the ship and a few people, and I had to turn tail and run.
I think the Jesuits are part of all of this. This is the Jesuit bloc in Cordoba, Argentina. Argentina, I've heard, Brazil, it's all kind of became a safe haven for Germans after the war, and probably before the war. The type of settlement for indigenous people in Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay were known as Jesuit reductions, which started in 1615. And I find it notable that, the word reduction means the act of making something smaller or less in size. Pope Francis is from Argentina, and he spent 2 years at the Jesuit block. Okay. This might have been pointed out by others, the audience hall at the Vatican and what it looks like.
Reptilian. Kind of
And
proves that they're reptilian almost.
And this is a bizarre statue behind the papal throne.
Another one.
It's called the Statue of the Resurrection and said to depict Jesus rising from a crater in the Garden of Gethsemane, as well as the anguish of mankind living under the threat of nuclear war. What's that? What's that doing there? And it's all between the fangs. The papal throne and the sculpture is between the fangs of the serpent head. Okay. This was taken from World War II, and this is Joseph Goebbels. And then I don't know who these are. And then if you know, he's famous for saying, among other things, if you tell a big enough lie and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Propaganda works best when those being manipulated are confident they're acting on their own free will. And then it's the absolute right of a state to supervise the formation of public opinion. And Chrislam is the New World Order's one world religion. That was the direction they were going in, as merging some kind of merger of Christianity and Islam.
Nobody above bishop is human in the Catholic religion. And most of the bishops have reptilian souls as well.
Some of the Nazi human experimentation and concentration camps involved the study of a substance made from beet and apple pectin called polygol for its effectiveness in aiding blood clotting. So they were looking for something to help blood clotting for whatever reason. Okay. The House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha succeeded to the British throne in 1901 with the accession of King Edward VII, which is the same German lineage that Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert, came from, as well as Leopold I, the King of Belgium, and other royal lines of Bulgaria and Portugal and their descendants. And when I was talking earlier about the German colony effort in the Republic of Texas in the mid-1800s, early mid-1800s, that was led by this same house of Saxe-Coburg. The name was changed to Windsor, allegedly because of anti-German sentiment.
They might have used that blood clotting agent in the making of adrenochrome.
Yeah, I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
And then this picture exists for those who may have seen it before, of this picture of the sun in 1933 showing the royal family doing what we know as a Nazi salute. And so I'm just saying the only ones that benefit from all of our negative emotional states are the parasites, and they've sucked up all the wealth of the earth from themselves. And you know, talk about the ideas that the elite are reptilians here. So I think I'm going to go ahead and end this here. I have a ton more information, but I think that's probably a good stopping point.
Maybe part 2, I guess.
Yeah. So where do you think that this goes from here? What is your sort of following this? Where does that go? The reshaping history. I mean, your presentation, where does that go?
Well, I've already started on it, like I said, on looking at history from different eyes from the end of World War II, or from World War II on to 1960.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I can go through that quickly right now if you're okay with that.
No. I'm saying if we reschedule for another thing, give us some coming attractions. Where does it go?
Okay.
I'm just asking, just in a few words, where does it go?
How the elites planned and created conditions for one world government.
I see. Very, very interesting. Well, I think that, yeah, I think that we're going to leave it here. Let me see, I just want to bring this to, we've been going for a little bit over 2 hours, which is about, that's about as long as people can absorb. So I really want to thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for this, and we'll be in touch about scheduling a part 2 to this. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I will be in touch to just ask you to send me some links that I can post with the article that will accompany this.
Okay, I will do
Good.
that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's something that, I'm sorry if it's disjointed. It's really a great deal of information, and
yeah,
it's the only
yeah,
way I know
sure.
how to present it effectively, because I can talk about it, which is what I had planned to do
Yeah.
first. And then when you asked me about PowerPoint, I thought, well, maybe I can just go through it this way. But it does help to have the pictures and whatnot to go along with it.
It does. It just, it's kind of it's more of a right brain than a left brain, and it's just very, very interesting. Gary, do you want to add anything here?
Not too much, I guess. Kind of just shows the reptilian plan of on the way to take over everything and totally enslave us. They're trying to do it now, and this fake virus. They haven't identified the virus, and they got us wearing masks, and they're doing it. What are they testing for if they haven't found the virus? And what are they going to vaccinate for? It's all horrible, and they got everybody believing in it. And I don't know.
Right.
Well, definitely for those that are awake right now, you can see the end game playing out pretty clearly.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of people have been put to sleep by the false narrative.
Right. Okay. Well, before we go, is there anything that you had wanted to say that you haven't been able to say until right now?
Just that I definitely have enough material for a part 2.
Oh, yeah.
And I did do some research on the links that you sent about Fomenko and the new chronology.
Yeah.
And so I've done some research for that. And I've also, I've got some other places I could go, but I really want to focus on this history,
Oh, yeah.
how it was hidden, and how the narrative was rewritten and reshaped to get us conditioned and docile and obedient, and not see what's around us, believe what we're told, and the psychological warfare that's been going on here, and the crimes of humanity that have been committed that are not known about, above and
Right.
beyond what we're told about.
Right. So we look forward to scheduling that with you, and I'll be in touch with you right now, so you can send me some reference links that I can include with the article. So thank you both very much.
Put our websites in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much for making this possible.
Oh, sure.
Alfred and Gary.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Alfred. Yeah. Thank you,
Okay,
Michelle,
then.
for having such a good presentation that I could
Yeah.
join.
It's just excellent. Good enough. Well, thank you then. Okay.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank
Good night,
you.
everybody.